lost, but now am found. Was blind, but now I see. Was lost, but now am found.
The reading I chose for this morning is called The 7 Deadly Sins Committed at a Church Bake Sale. Author unknown. This is not a politically correct or empowering reading, but it does demonstrate how many people perceive sin. A Gadsden, Alabama newspaper reported that the 7 deadly sins, greed, sloth, lust, gluttony, pride, wrath, were all committed Sunday during a twice-annual bake sale at St. Mary's of the Immaculate Conception Church. In total, 347 individual acts of sin were committed, with nearly every attendee committing at least one of the 7 deadly sins as outlined by Gregory the Great in the 5th century. My cookies, cakes, and brownies are always the highlight of the church bake sale. Everyone says so, said parishioner Connie Barrett, 49, openly committing the sin of pride. Sometimes even I'm amazed at how well my goodies turn out. Fellow parishioner Betsy Wicks agreed. Every time I go past Connie's table, I just have to buy something, said Wicks, who commits the sin of gluttony at every St. Mary's bake sale, as well as most Friday nights at Old Country Buffet. I simply can't help myself. It's all so delicious. The popularity of Barrett's mouth-watering wares elicits the sin of envy in many of her fellow vendors. Connie has this fantastic book of recipes her grandmother gave her, and she won't share it with anyone. Church organist Georgia Brandt said, "This year I made white chocolate blondies and thought they would be a big hit. But most people went straight to Connie's table, got what they wanted, and left." All the while, Connie just stood there looking with smug satisfaction all over her face. It took every strength in my body not to go over there and tell her off. While the sins of wrath and greed were each committed dozens of times at the event, Barrett and longtime bake sale rival Rick Parker brought them together in full force. Rick said he wanted to make a bet over whose table would make the most money, said Barrett, exhibiting greed. Whoever lost would have to sit in the dunk tank at the St. Mary's Summer Fun Festival. I figured for such a fun and good cause, a little wager couldn't hurt. Besides, I always bring in the church more money, so I couldn't possibly lose. Moments after agreeing to the wager, Parker became wrathful when Barrett, the bake sales co-chair, grabbed the best table location under the pretense of having to keep the coffee machine full. Now, Parker attempted to exact revenge by reporting an alleged Barrett misdeed to the church priest. I mentioned to Reverend Sarah that I had seen candles at Connie's house that I wouldn't be surprised one bit if she stole from the church storage closet. Said Parker, who also committed the sin of sloth by forcing his son to set up and man his table while he gossiped with friends. Perhaps if the priest investigates this, by this time next year, Connie won't be co-chair of the bake sale, and in her place, we'll have someone who's willing to rotate the choicest tables. The sin of lust also reared its ugly head at the bake sale, largely due to the presence of Melissa Wyckoff, a shapely 30-year-old redhead whose family recently joined the church. While some attendees oogled Wyckoff, the primary object of lust for others was the personable Reverend Sarah. Though attendees' feelings of lust were never acted upon, they didn't go unnoticed. There's something not right about that Melissa Wyckoff, said envious and wrathful bake sale participant Jilly Brandon, after her wife, Connie, offered Wyckoff one of her Rice Krispie treats to welcome her to the parish. She might have just moved from California, but that red dress of hers should get her kicked out of church. According to St. Mary's treasurers Beth Ellen Coyle, informal church-sponsored events are notorious breeding grounds for the 7 deadly sins. Bake sales, haunted houses, pancake breakfasts, such church events are rife with potential for sin. This year we had to eliminate the guess your weight booth because envy and pride had gotten so out of hand. What is this thing called sin? This thing that causes Catholics to genuflect, Protestants to hang their head, and Unitarian Universalists to grind our teeth. What is this thing called sin that sends the unbaptized to hell with murderers and the unrepentant? It is no wonder why many Unitarian Universalists have thrown sin out with the bathwater, baby and all. Growing up Unitarian Universalist in a humanist congregation, I didn't learn about the theological concepts such as sin and guilt or redemption. However, in college, I did attend a Black Baptist church for a year and was berated for sins that I had learned in my UU church were healthy, normal, young adult behaviors. In the end, I left this church because of my perception of their sins of homophobia and hypocrisy. It wasn't until seminary that I paid any attention to the idea of sin, and that was only long enough to pass those pesky Judeo-Christian classes. In the 25 years that I have been preaching to Unitarian Universalist congregations, only twice have I attempted to address Unitarian Universalism's relationship to the idea of sin. Now, the first time I quoted Rabbi Dr. Reuven Hammer, former president of the International Rabbinical Assembly, who wrote, "Judaism teaches that human beings are not basically sinful. We come into the world neither carrying the baggage of sin committed by our ancestors nor tainted by it." He goes on to say, "Rather, sin is the result of our human inclinations which must be properly channeled. The concept of sin suggests a straying from the correct ways, from what is good and straight." So have you already tuned me out? I tuned myself out. This treatise was very unsatisfying. The second time, I came at it from the Greek translation to miss the mark, as in you're shooting an arrow at a target and you don't hit the center. But as I looked at the 10 Commandments, I realized that killing someone is more than missing the mark. Cheating on your husband and wife is more than missing the mark. Bearing false witness is more than missing the mark. In both of these sermons, I argued that to sin is to fall short of our best selves. I was deeply dissatisfied with these approaches as they did not adequately translate the depth and importance of the Christian concept of sin in a way with which Unitarian Universalists could resonate. So this past Christmas, I decided to preach about my favorite Christmas carol, O Holy Night. The carol's lyrics are, "O holy night, the stars are brightly shining. This is the night of our dear Savior's birth. Along came the world in sin and error pining till he appeared and the soul felt its worth." I joked with the congregation I served that I was sure it was strange for some of them that a Jewish-born, humanist-leaning Unitarian Universalist loves Christmas carols. It was in the process of writing about this carol that I came to an understanding of sin that I hadn't had before. Let's go back to the beginning, to Genesis. In the biblical story of Genesis, God takes Adam and Eve into the Garden of Eden, a paradise of fruit trees, in order that they might live well and steward the garden. He informs Adam, "You may freely eat of every tree in the garden, but the tree of knowledge of good and evil you shall not eat of, for in the day that you eat of it, you shall die." Now, most of us know what happens next. A serpent convinces Eve that actually she will not die. Rather, she will be like God and have the knowledge of good and evil. Eve, in turn, convinces Adam to take a bite of the apple. So many Christians see the first sin as disobeying God. I can totally relate to Eve in this story. I imagine that she was a lot like Unitarian Universalists I know, curious, wanting to gain knowledge about concepts dangled in front of her by God. I can see her asking herself, what is good and evil? Why can't I know about it? Why does it cause death? What is it to die? There's also a power dynamic piece going on here as well. Why can only God know about good and evil? Why must I be protected or kept from the knowledge? As anyone will tell you, I am stubborn. If someone says to me, I can't do something, well, I'm very likely to do it, or at least try. When I was thinking about going into the ministry, the then president of the Unitarian Universalist Association took me out to lunch and told me, "Our congregations are not ready for you." Now, at the time, no black woman had been called through the settlement process to a Unitarian Universalist congregation. This was all the motivation I needed. Even though I originally thought I'd be a community minister, I immediately switched gears and decided to become a parish minister, and 23 years later, I'm here. It didn't turn out so well for Eve or Adam, the earth or rest of humanity. The punishments for curiosity and stubbornness were subjugation and pain for all childbearing women, a cursed existence for the land from which the tree of knowledge grew, and death for all humanity. In the Christian scriptures, Romans chapter 5, verse 12, the Apostle Paul explains, "Therefore, just as sin came into the world through one man, and death came through sin, and so death spread to all, because all have sinned." Now, this is Unitarian Universalist' first problem with sin. The idea that everyone is born tainted because Adam and Eve disobeyed God is an anathema to our core principle of the inherent worth and dignity of every person, and the belief that each of us bears responsibility for our own mistakes and not the mistakes of our forebears. Each child that's born is born with worth and dignity. Infants do not sin. They are not envious or boastful, covetous or gluttonous. Infants don't lust or desire great wealth. I suppose you could stretch an infant's need for constant sleep as the sin of sloth. But they are doing all the work their little bodies allow them to do. Another problem that Unitarian Universalists have with sin is the idea that just because you have the knowledge of evil, just because you have the ability to do evil, just because you have experienced evil, does not require you to do evil. It is a faulty hypothesis. It does not allow for, among other things, the fact that the knowledge of good, too, was released. That good and beauty and love that surrounds us is often a greater influence on us than evil. As a matter of fact, I have found that good is a more powerful pull than evil. Let me just say that I see evil as that which is destructive to life, and good as that which enhances or supports life. Now, I grew up in an abusive, alcoholic family. Many of my siblings in turn battled addiction, depression, and anxiety. But through my connections with some amazing teachers, my faith, and an innate stubbornness, I was able to find and hold on to the good in me and in the world. And while we mostly hear about the generational cycles of abuse begetting abuse, I have the incredible fortune of witnessing so many people who struggled against evil they experienced and worked for life. I stated earlier that according to the story of Adam and Eve, sin is disobeying the command of God. And as someone who doesn't believe in an anthropomorphic deity in the sky punishing you and blessing you, this idea of sin didn't resonate with me. However, when exploring this idea of sin as described in the Christmas Carol, it occurred to me that it was not Adam and Eve being naughty children, doing what Father God had asked them not to do, that was the sin. It was the fact they broke the covenant they made with God that was the sin. I have given you life. I have given you food, shelter, beauty, love, meaningful work, and I asked you to not do one thing. It is not a minor thing. It is something that will change your lives, change the entire world. And furthermore, you and I had a special relationship. And instead of respecting that, you listened to a serpent and betrayed the promises we made to one another. You betrayed me and brought evil to yourself and evil to me. And this is a similar covenant to the one created by God and the people of Israel. You will be my people, I will be your God. I will save you from slavery and the despair of Egyptian rule and give you a homeland of plenty. You will be loved and honored above all people. What I expect from you is that I will be your God and you will worship none other and nothing other than I. That you will set aside one day for me and remember our relationship and what our relationship has encompassed. If you respect me, you will not call me names or curse me. I expect you to honor those who gave you birth and those who raised you. I expect you to treat one another with esteem, to not take another's life, to not cheat on your spouse, to not steal from my people, to not lie about another, to not desire what another has and you do not. Time and time again, this covenant is broken by the Israelites and God's love and promise betrayed. As Unitarian Universalists, we understand and embrace the idea of covenant. Our principles and purposes are how we as diverse people with diverse experiences, opinions, ideas, live together with respect, compassion, and justice. Each week, at the church I serve in Barnstable, Massachusetts, we covenant to dwell together in peace, to seek knowledge and freedom, to serve humanity and fellowship, to the end that all souls shall grow into harmony with the divine. This is part of our promise to one another, our agreement how our relationship will be defined, and the boundaries that hold it all together. Now, in our covenant, there is room for interpretation of what dwelling together in peace means and what the divine signifies. But without a covenant, without our principles and purposes, our understanding that each person is worthy, that we accept one another, not merely tolerate each other, that we're here to encourage spiritual growth, justice, and world community. And we do so in the framework of the democratic ethic. Without our understanding and agreement to these principles, it would be difficult to trust one another with the deepest parts of ourselves, our faith, our failing, our sorrows, our fears. We all need covenants in order to truly understand why we are here, what our purpose is, and how we will live out our lives together. And you know, a perceived or actual breach of this covenant often creates divisions, misunderstandings, hurts, and abuse. If I were to make the statement that anyone who believes in God is irrational, would you feel accepted even if you don't believe in God, and that your dignity and worth were being honored? If I refused to help a homeless man, saying that he made his bed and now he must lie in it, would you be comfortable coming to church if you lost your job? If every time you spoke your understanding of faith you were ridiculed, would you be able to stay in relationship with members of this congregation? Think about it. When you tell your best friend you are thinking of leaving your partner and he tells someone else, what does that do to your relationship? When you promise your wife that you will eat right and take care of yourself and yet you continue to abuse your body, what does that do to your relationship? When you promise yourself to be kind and compassionate to those struggling with life, and yet you're dismissive of the poor, what does that do to your relationship with yourself? Right now, our elected leaders are breaking the covenants they made when they took office to represent the people, all the people, not just the wealthy, not just the fringe minority, but all the people. They are breaking the social covenant to protect those who are the most vulnerable, the young, the elderly, the poor, the sick, the homeless. They are breaking the covenant of civil rights by discriminating against people of color, families that have come to this country seeking safety and a better life, Muslim people, and people who are transgender. They are breaking the covenant of democracy by taking money from big business, labeling it free speech, and providing tax breaks for the wealthiest. They are ignoring the covenant with the earth by reinvesting in coal and drilling in protected lands. They are breaking the covenants with the world with careless, dangerous action and harmful rhetoric. And the anger and fear and feelings of worthlessness that have grown in many of us have resulted in more covenants being broken in communities, in families, in friendships. To say this is simply missing the mark does not do justice to our own experiences. As the carol, O Holy Night says, we are pining. The world is weary, pining for change, pining for hope, for peace, for a new way. Along came the world in sin and error, pining, and he appeared, and the soul felt its worth. This, of course, brings us to Jesus, which is not any more easy to speak about. In his letter to the Corinthians, the Apostle Paul writes, "For by a man came death, and by a man the resurrection of the dead." So I ask you, have you known someone who helped you discover your worth? Have you ever had someone put up a mirror to your heart, and it revealed your inner beauty, your brilliance, your innate goodness? Have you ever met someone who was so forgiving, so loving, so fully present that you felt forgiven, loved, and noticed in the fullness of who you are? Now, can you imagine what would happen if the whole world felt that way? The soul of everyone, the depths of everyone's psyche loved into wholeness. This is what Jesus did and continues to do for so many 2,000 years after his birth. This is what Mother Teresa and Martin Luther King Jr. did. They showed people their worth. They lifted up their dignity. They fought for justice for the marginalized. They showed us that each of us has the potential to heal the soul of the world. We make and break covenants with one another, our larger community, the earth, God, the world, all the time. We sin every day. But the power of our faith, the saving message, is that each of us has the ability to fulfill our promise by renewing our commitment to these covenants, by offering forgiveness, and by working for justice, so that all might know their worth and find hope and love in this life. May it be so. Amen.